Right, well, thanks for joining us today. I'm Sam Chulton. For those that don't know me, I chair the Digital Twin Hub. My personal background is kind of data scientist, software engineer, but I've been working with University of Cambridge kind of actively in this digital twin space now for about 18 months. So really starting to kind of get a good grasp of what's going on in that space. So this format we're using today is a new approach for us within the hub. We're kind of coining these as our sort of community insight sessions. We're running these as a much more kind of relaxed type of structure, giving you as the members an opportunity to understand what some of the core activities that are going on within the hub are, and also get to know some of the members slightly better. So as with all of these sessions, they are being recorded, they'll be made available in future, and the individuals that are being interviewed are all members within the hub community themselves. So any questions you've got or points that we don't cover as part of today, please feel free to use the messaging functions within the hub and follow up with them directly. So we're really fortunate today to have Tom Hughes with us. Tom Hughes is the delivery lead for the Digital Twin Hub, so works very closely with me and the rest of the team. Has been doing so now for just over a year. But the best person to introduce Tom is probably Tom, so I'll pass over to Tom now and let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hi Sam, and thanks. And hello everyone. Yeah, Tom Hughes, delivery lead at the DT Hub.
Brilliant, thanks Tom. Would you like to just kind of give us and the members a bit of an idea of how you became kind of involved with the Digital Twin Hub?
Sure. So I'm seconded to the National Digital Twin Programme from Mott MacDonald, and I suppose my route to the DT Hub really came through connection with Mark Enzer. I've been working with Mark on some of our internal programmes for excellence in innovation during 2018. As the programme was looking to second people in to support delivery, Mark kind of came to me with the opportunity of joining the Digital Twin Hub team. And it really felt like it fitted me and my professional background quite well. So I've been involved with Mott MacDonald's BIM communities for nearly a decade. And I think for me, the bit that's always been most kind of professionally and personally satisfying was really that the culture and the community connection across a large number of technical professionals. So yeah, I think the kind of the natural transfer perhaps of some of the domain knowledge around BIM and into digital twins, but also some of that professional experience of building communities. For me, it felt like the Digital Twin Hub would be a really exciting opportunity. So I put my CV forward, and glad to say that you picked me for the role, Sam. So thanks for that.
We're very grateful you've been able to come on board. And what was your sort of familiarity with twins before you became involved with us?
I've got to say awareness, certainly, and I think particularly that transition perhaps from what would have been BIM level 2 towards a more digitally enabled kind of asset or enterprise. But certainly, over the last year, in terms of understanding more of the technical aspects, it's been very good for me professionally, and equally connecting with members across the community and hearing a lot of stories about how organisations are developing their digital twins. I think that really puts some of the kind of the concepts into practice, and is probably what we're trying to embody right the way through the hub.
No, that's really interesting. Thanks, Tom. So, hopefully everyone's kind of broadly aware, but today we're here to talk about a fairly kind of significant undertaking, and one of the first of its kind that at least we're aware of, and that's looking at how we can start to understand where everyone is with respect to digital twins at the moment. And I think people have got a kind of general sense, but starting to put any kind of quantitative measures against that, it is quite new. Would you just be able to give the members a bit of background on what it is, how we've got to where we are, and just kind of give us a bit of a sense?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that the kind of starting point from this was a lot of the interviews we did with our members, both prior to launching the hub and equally after launch. Almost always when we start talking to members of the community about digital twins and their progress in the space, at some point during that conversation, maturity starts to come up. I think it's a natural thing that people kind of want to understand where they might be within their peers. And so we started to think, collectively, how we might go about measuring that. And maybe thinking about it more in terms of organizational maturity rather than the maturity of a specific twin, but maybe the kind of the components of an organization that is working in a mature way towards delivering twins, both for organizational benefits and for public and environmental good. One of the approaches that we thought we would have some success with was perhaps using a kind of a survey of our members and starting to think about how we'd want to structure that survey, and identified an opportunity that perhaps some of the work that had been done through the ICG infrastructure client group, so I should say for members that might not be aware, around Project 13 and maturity towards digital transformation would be a good starting point. And so that kind of took us to Smart Infrastructure Index, which was the platform used for doing that maturity assessment for Project 13.
And if I remember right, part of the reason for using the Smart Infrastructure Index wasn't just because it was something we'd had. It was kind of well used already, and we'd had fairly good feedback from members that had previously interacted with it through Project 13.
Yeah, that's correct. And so some of our founding members on the DT Hub are members of the infrastructure client group. So there's a kind of an existing familiarity with it as a platform. Obviously, we were going to use it for a slightly different purpose, but we felt that familiarity was positive. Likewise, because we've got some historic data, and this obviously isn't long-term data, it's a relatively new platform, but some things that we could look at prior to having the Digital Twin Hub and prior to perhaps the national conversation around digital twins that we could kind of look at as potential indicators or predictors, I guess, towards maturity around digital twins in the national programme.
No, that's brilliant. I guess for any of the members that aren't familiar, one of the really cool things about the tool is that it lets you see how your organization compares against others within the industry as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so it obviously doesn't show organization by organization where everyone is, but it takes your organization and looks at peers within similar subsectors within the built environment. So you can kind of see where you are within a common group. It's obviously the kind of the averages, but yeah, certainly it gives you that sector average and where you sit across a range of different metrics. So yeah, kind of digital transformation is just one metric. There's actually a range of metrics that are measured through the question set.
No, I can see from the members we've got with us today that some of those were able to take part with it this time round, and hopefully we'll be able to take part in future studies. How many kind of completions did we manage to get this time round? How many organizations did that map to?
Sure. So within our kind of eligible members, and maybe that's a good point to clarify. For our first attempt at doing this, we wanted to focus on those members which either own or operate assets rather than the whole membership community. But yeah, within that, we had 19% of eligible members taking part, which I think is a good outcome for the first time we've submitted, put the survey out there. And I think particularly with some of the constraints on people's time this year. And that represented 13 asset owning organizations. So a reasonably large sample, but equally opportunities for us to improve. I think, and perhaps in some of the details of the reporting, there's obviously the potential for some kind of selection bias within the survey there. So as a community, we are much more likely to be mature toward digital twins than those outside the community. And then equally kind of on a volunteer bias, those people that volunteer responses to this survey may tend to be more mature. So I think what we've got is perhaps a good assessment of the potentially more mature end of the community and the broader sector. But I think still some very interesting insights within that.
No, I think that kind of volunteer bias thing is definitely something I'd like to kind of touch back on later. But we've obviously mentioned that the Smart Infrastructure Index is a capability that's been used for kind of broader digital transformation maturity. Can you just give the kind of the members a sense of what differentiates that between what we've kind of surfaced this time around?
Sure, and maybe there's a little bit of background in how the Smart Infrastructure Index actually works in practice. The best analogy that I can kind of come up with is those design your own adventure books, where depending on the question, the answer to a question, that sort of determines your journey through a question set. What that means is actually the infrastructure index holds a really big bank of questions, but as an individual, you kind of get guided through based on your responses. So we kind of cover quite a lot of ground, but only are sort of exposing questions that are relevant to people based on their prior answers. And one of the things we looked at was based on the question set that had been used for the infrastructure client group, which parts of those question sets did we think were kind of relevant towards national digital twin? And obviously between digital transformation and digital twins, there's quite a lot of overlap. So we've got a good indicator based on past data where we might see higher measures of maturity. And then we look to extend that. So we've essentially developed this year a specific question set that sits alongside the core as an extension that relates to digital twins and the National Digital Twin Programme. And so when members were invited to complete the infrastructure survey through the hub, they were given both question sets as one experience and essentially guided through that story, depending on what they'd answered within the question sets, took them to different parts. And essentially, when we start to analyze the data on the back end, we get a picture of both the kind of the core maturity towards digital transformation, and then a supplementary set on maturity towards digital twins and the National Digital Twin Programme.
No, thank you. I mean, that's really, I think, really helped clear it up in my mind at least. So obviously digital transformation in the broader sense is something organizations have been looking at in some guise for years now. Digital twins are much more new, they're much more emergent at the moment. Do you have a sense that now's the right time to start measuring? Is it too early? What's your kind of opinion on that, Tom?
I think with everything, once you start having a conversation around a topic, there's a natural tendency to want to look at what's measurable and use that in a way that's got value. And I think particularly within our remit, how can we use those measures within the community to help shape and support the community in a way that's most meaningful to them? So while I think, yes, it's very early, of course, because we're building on the knowledge of the kind of the digital transformation question set, and equally we've got knowledge about what are the key objectives for us as the hub and the National Digital Twin Programme. I think we can ask some sort of reasonably structured questions, and from that sort of build some insights over time. Obviously, and I think you kind of said we might touch back on this, getting a better representation within the community, so more people responding gives us more information, allows us to take more informed actions, and likewise maybe looking at beyond the asset owner and operator community within the hub, to other members, and getting their perspective on maturity within the industry would equally add further value.
Yeah, and I think that piece especially, it'd be nice to touch back on towards the end, which is think about how the supply chain and vendors as a whole might be able to contribute to this. Hopefully the technology is working for everyone and they've just been hit with their first poll. We've got a couple of these that we're just going to kind of flash up during today's session. Please answer them if you can. They're just really useful for giving us a sense of are we taking the hub in the right direction? Is it reflective of the wider community views? So obviously the main reason everyone is here today is to actually hear what were the kind of the core findings that have come out of the Smart Infrastructure Index. I mean, I'm really excited to see what they are. I know Tom is really excited to share them with us. So Tom, do you want to just kind of, I don't know, pick a couple of the kind of the major points from your sense and give us a thought around why those are so interesting as well?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the first one, it follows on directly from the survey, and I hope people have voted and this doesn't bias their answers. But actually, although we started out with this thought that transformation would be a good predictor, and although within those that responded, we did see a slightly higher than average maturity towards transformation, it wasn't the indicator with the highest average within our group. So actually, maturity indicators for things like continual improvement and things like asset management were better predictors. So, potentially we've got a range of indicators that all contribute towards digital twins, but maybe it's, I think customer focus was again another very high indicator. So kind of that customer focus, that ability to kind of look at continual improvement, and perhaps there's a little bit there about being willing to try things and learn from the efforts of trying. So not necessarily waiting for success, but working from a continual improvement base. And then equally that the focus on managing the asset as well within our survey sample. And I've obviously got to always qualify it. We've only got the survey sample that we've got. They seem to be, maturity on those three metrics seem to be better predictors than perhaps just digital transformation on its own. So that was probably the thing that we kind of started out with a hypothesis, but actually found out fairly quickly through the analysis that it perhaps isn't the best indicator, or the best indicator on its own, I should say. One of the other things that we think is quite interesting, and there's a range of questions that are kind of interconnected within the analysis, but there's perhaps some early indicators of risk occurring around communication as it relates to digital twins. And so we can kind of see from the responses that there might not be consistency in terms of communication, and that there's a potential for kind of the expectations to become detached from some of the real world challenges. And I think that's perhaps a key thing for us as a digital twin hub and within the community to really focus on, that we don't kind of want to stretch expectations away from the here and now challenges. They're very related, obviously. It's kind of overcoming challenges is what really leads to value and deliverables. And so kind of just having on one side, here are all the expectations that a digital twin can do, and it's disconnected from any of the practical challenges, just creates that risk. There's kind of a period of disillusionment that may occur when the kind of those ambitious objectives don't become reality because there's challenges in the real world that prevent them, but they're not necessarily always connected through communication.
I mean, I think both of those points you made are really important. I guess jumping back onto the kind of the indicators piece, I know from kind of working quite a lot with Anglian Water and Heathrow, they're both very kind of customer centric organizations, and perhaps it should make sense that some of those sorts of thoughts and feelings are reflected in some of what we're seeing in terms of the organizations that are coming across as more forward looking. Did those results reflect your own personal opinions going into this?
I think on reflection, having spent some time with members through the kind of the engagement process, the kind of myself feeling about the results is maybe they're not that surprising once we see them, but equally perhaps again just reflecting on where we started on this process, we hadn't had that idea initially. It wasn't the thing we thought of first. So there's probably two parts of that. One is what we're seeing looks right, and obviously within a small sample set that's quite helpful because it allows you to think that we've got some validation at small scale, but it probably does apply to the broader community. So that's really helpful. And I think equally with any sort of survey and analysis, sometimes allowing yourself to go back to your initial assumptions and say, actually, we didn't think about this initially, but now we've seen it, it's so obvious. How does that help us within the hub think about what we prioritize in terms of our engagement, our thematic discussions? I think those kind of insights are the things that will help us be more kind of community focused. We know a bit more about the community, and by doing that we can kind of deliver activities that are more relevant to them and equally connected back to the national program.
And I think that's a really important point for our members as a whole, is actually we're not here within the hub to set that agenda. We want the community to drive that agenda for us, and we can kind of structure what we do around that. And I think I'd be quite surprised if everyone in this call hasn't got some kind of mild concerns about these issues surrounding the hype curve. And have we got some kind of quantitative sense that risk is really starting to come to the fore?
I think we have, obviously, with the qualification that we've only got a small sample of the community, a small representation of organisations in general. I think we're all well aware that within the kind of domain of digital twins, there are a lot of big claims being made about the potential for them, and they are valid, but they are future objectives. And I think, the potential risks that we start to see, and it's some of the analytics that we get through the survey, is sort of how do different roles within organizations see the same topic. So although we're not asking, we're not looking at individuals on an individual basis, we do ask for some role profiling data. So we can start to see that at different roles, there's maybe more awareness of challenges and less expectation of benefits, and at other roles, less awareness of challenge, but more expectation of benefits. And I think, that holds true for the majority of disruptive technologies. Those that are more actively delivering the technology in practice are aware of the challenges, and those that are perhaps looking at how that technology can benefit their organization, their customers, their environment, maybe in some instances disconnected from those challenges. And I think the kind of my perspective on that is actually it's the kind of communication across those different groups within organizations or within a broad community that helps each kind of part of the solution be more aware of what the challenges are and what benefits we're trying to achieve. And so it does form quite a well-defined kind of hype cycle of disruptive technologies. And I think essentially it's not totally surprising that we are seeing that for digital twins, but equally, if we've got some indicators that there is that, what can we do within the community to try and address that and mitigate some of that potential disillusionment?
Yeah, no, I think I think that's a very, very kind of well-versed response to that. Hopefully, we can get the next poll up whilst I'm asking Tom the next question. But one of the things I'd just be keen to get a sense of from you, Tom, is were we able to get a sense of where maturity is? Are we seeing organizations as relatively immature, or is that maturity starting to grow? What's your kind of understanding, having gone through the survey now?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that again, the qualifier that we've got this smaller subsample within our community that are more likely to be mature towards digital twins. I think what we've seen is there's not a huge variation within that subsample. So there's obviously a difference within different organizations, but typically speaking, everyone's at a relatively similar place. And I think that does, one is obviously the kind of the sample we've got, but equally that's validated by a lot of the interviews that you've done and that I've done, and that we do typically find that while there's areas of more maturity or less maturity, most of our community has a relatively similar level of maturity, and digital twins are a relatively new organizational concept. There may be technical concepts that organizations have been doing for a long time, but perhaps drawing those things together and looking at the kind of the benefit from a customer perspective or the benefit from a social perspective is a relatively new thing that people are identifying as being a really important opportunity. Yeah. I mean, I think the the positives from that is that as a community that's all broadly similar in terms of maturity, there's a lot of value people can learn from one another, rather than it being looking for particular leaders and just emulating that approach. And I think that's core to the kind of the purpose of the hub is that collective learning rather than just simple emulation. I also think one of the challenges we obviously had in terms of establishing a novel question set was we didn't quite know where to pick the questions, and we went through a couple of rounds of iteration to try and sense check what we were asking. And actually we're seeing that typically we're getting responses in about the middle of the range. So in terms of that design your own story, most people are getting about halfway down the story before they're kind of finding that actually the questions become less relevant to them. And I think that's kind of pleasing. It makes me feel like we did a good job in terms of validating that novel question set. There's still room for growth in terms of there's questions that indicate higher and higher levels of maturity that we're not seeing most people getting to today, and that for me makes me feel like over time, as a community and supported through the hub and the program, we can actually work into those higher order maturity indicators for digital twins.
No, thanks for that, Tom. That's really good. And I think the results from the poll kind of indicate that the biggest priority for maturity at the moment is getting that understanding clear and consistent. I imagine a number of the members that are listening to this are going to want to kind of interrogate some of the findings themselves and draw their own conclusions. What's the plan kind of going forward from here for the members?
Yeah, so obviously this is kind of our first presentation of the results, and really this is just a conversation about what we've found. This week we're going to be publishing in summary the findings, so essentially what have been the key findings from the survey, and then thinking about how we can really engage with the community around those. So as much as we can look at what the survey is telling us, it's not really for us to tell the community what it means to them. And so we've been working through our Gemini projects program to look at, essentially this as part of a bigger baselining exercise within the hub and a community response to that. So I think for those people that do want to perhaps get a little bit deeper than just the kind of the summary of key findings, perhaps looking for the opportunities to engage through that Gemini project as part of our kind of DT Hub baselining exercise will give insights at a deeper level, but also more importantly than just seeing what the data says, the community's opportunity to respond to us and say, this is really great, but to us it means this, and are you thinking about this in the next 6, 12 months, because it's what we really need to see ourselves advancing.
Yeah, no, I think I know we've chatted about this a few times. That one of the dangers is that we aren't able to kind of fully encompass those views, and the only way that we can do that effectively is by getting as many people from the community involved as possible. I'm really keen to sort of start getting some questions really from the community. So in a minute, I'll open this up for kind of questions. So please kind of use the raise your hand function. Whilst we're waiting for that, obviously not everyone got a chance to take place, and one of the really interesting things would be to kind of measure now versus where we are in 12 months time. Can you just give us a sense of what the plans are going forward?
Yes, I think exactly that. Now that we've seen, it's a novel question set, we kind of entered into this program, with a bit of an innovation mindset that this might not be particularly useful, but I think we've actually seen that there is value in us asking these questions, and so it is intentionally something that we would like to continue doing forward, so that not only can we give people an indication of where they are today, but as a community we can see whether we're moving forward, or equally as we grow as a community, actually we might see on average things dropping back slightly, so allowing us to be a little bit more dynamic and keeping what we're doing relevant to everyone in the community, and helping to kind of surface content that's most relevant to people based on their own journey on digital twins. I mean, I think in terms of advice for people is, as a survey tool, that kind of design your own story analogy is very relevant. So we're not going to be asking lots of questions that are not relevant to you. We're kind of trimming the question set dynamically. So it's intended to be a relatively quick process for people. The questions are all essentially yes, no, or maybe yes, maybe no. So it's really based on your opinion of the question. At first glance, what do you feel? So yeah, we've seen that people are typically completing the survey in between 10 and 15 minutes, depending on how many questions they get. And if they happen to be one of the sort of the more mature representatives, then it may be slightly longer, but essentially it's only long because you've got a lot of useful insight you can provide to us and by proxy to the greater community. So I think that for me, in terms of advice, is do take part. It's relatively simple to complete the survey. It's relatively quick to complete the survey, and essentially gaining more insight across a larger representation of the community will give us more that we can use to refine our own programs and also support you in creating that culture of learning within the community and collaboration within the community.
No, brilliant. Thanks, Tom. It's really good to see that the vast majority are really keen on kind of supporting and taking part next year. Again, for anyone that's kind of lacking any clarity on exactly what the survey was, how it operated, all of this will be kind of explicitly explained in the summary report that's going out later this week. So I've got a couple of questions I can definitely ask, but I'm also keen to kind of hear any questions that any of the listeners have got. hopefully the raised hand function should work. So please make use of that if there's anything you'd specifically like to ask. If that's not working for you and you do want to ask something, either use the chat function or the Q&A system. Whilst everyone's having a think about that, one of the bits we kind of brushed over a bit earlier was this has obviously been asset owner focused up until now. And the kind of the supplier innovator community obviously represents quite a significant portion of those kind of involved in digital twins. How do you envisage that participation in the survey could work?
So I think it's all about developing the question set that's relevant to that innovator community. One of the, if you like, challenges of delivering this extension this year is to be relevant to the program and specifically relevant to digital twins within organizations. We needed to look beyond the core question set and create our own questions. And so actually a lot of our energies went into that question set. The platform to deliver it's obviously repeatable and scalable, but it's the kind of the domain knowledge that goes into the question set that's an important thing for us to think about and get right. And I think we made the right decision to focus initially on our asset owner and operator community. They were the first community in the hub. They were a community we'd done the majority of our member interviews on, so we'd got that kind of tactile knowledge of their own presentation of their journey, their maturity. 12 months on, I think actually we've got a growing knowledge of our innovator community, and it would be possible for us now to create a complementary question set that's looking at the same things but from a different perspective. And so my hope actually then would be, we're kind of getting different viewpoints on the same thing within the built environment sector, and actually that different perspectives on the same measure is it's kind of second order insights, if you like. We're kind of getting the views from the community from different angles. And again, thinking about those potential risks of disconnection between expectations, challenges, etc. We're able to then think about that within our own community and how we need to connect perhaps more broadly across the community to share kind of experiences and challenges within the DT Hub.
I mean, those broader kind of sectoral comparisons, I personally think will be absolutely fascinating, because even just from kind of member engagements, I think there are some quite distinctive kind of differences between the interest different sectors are taking in this, and also in terms of how kind of actively they think they're already doing some of this work as well. So I guess one of the kind of just bits that would be nice to kind of follow up on that is we're obviously looking to broaden out the hub in the new year, start being more inclusive, start looking at international membership. Do you think what we've got is able to kind of stretch to include international members and potentially kind of broader membership in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, it's always something we'd want to validate before moving forward with it. But ultimately, we're asking questions as they relate to digital twins within the context of the National Digital Twin Programme. But I think if you peel that back slightly and take something like data for the public good or the Gemini principles, and then take the kind of the challenges that an asset owner and operator have, fundamentally they don't just apply to the UK. They could apply anywhere. And so ultimately the question set is probably inclusive enough to include members that are international, but essentially looking towards the national programme to inform their approach to digital twins, and that they're essentially working on the same kind of challenges that their peers within the UK are. So yeah, I think it is, but as with everything, when we're kind of developing novel approaches, we'd want to kind of put that through a bit of validation first. But it says more so to me that actually the relevancy of the digital twin hub and the relevancy of the national programme's got international appeal, which is certainly what we're hearing from our broader stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, and I think I mean, just in a more broader sense, interest in twins is growing exponentially. I mean, what have we gone from a dozen members now, and I think we're at nearly 750 members. I mean, that really demonstrates the kind of the interest. As Tom kind of briefly alluded to earlier, we've got an annual benchmark report that we're working on at the moment that will be out kind of early next year, and that will give a much broader sense as to how things are progressing as a whole within the hub and outside of the hub, and give kind of a sense of where the general trends are and where kind of the community can help drive things forwards, and where we can help the community drive things forward. As I said, Tom is in the hub, he's active within the hub. So if anyone thinks of any kind of questions as they're going kind of processing all this over lunch, please do kind of follow up directly with Tom. We want to be kind of open, we want to be accessible. And just before I close, Tom, have you got kind of a closing note or call to action that you'd really like to see kind of embraced as we go forward?
I mean, yeah, I'd really like feedback both on this as a kind of an interview format, because you and I are looking at how we can do this more in the future. Obviously, we're working more remotely now than ever, so that kind of feedback on how we can engage more with the community. I think we're going to be publishing this summary of results, and so feedback first and foremost on that summary. Does it feel right for the community? Is hugely valuable, and that's going to inform that community response going forward. And then that's kind of short term. Medium term is the value in doing this kind of survey exercise, and the value we can get from it in terms of insights and informing our own activities is huge. We've spoken through some of those insights today and how it's actually changing our mindsets, perhaps, from my perspective and your perspective, Sam. So that awareness of the community needs, I think, is first and foremost in my mind. And so any opportunities to do that, whether that's through survey, through discussion on the hub, if people want to have a conversation over the phone, totally open to that. But I think the more we can understand what the community needs, the better we can be as a hub, and ultimately the more we can help to drive forward the National Digital Twin Programme.
Awesome, thanks, Tom, and thanks for taking the time today. And just very, very quickly before we close, kind of as we run down towards Christmas, there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff happening within the hub. So please do watch this space. We've got some new functionality coming to the hub. We've got standards information. There's going to be loads and loads of stuff going there. So I really do encourage you to kind of keep logging in, keep checking, and kind of engaging with stuff as it comes out. I won't keep you any longer. Really appreciate everyone kind of tuning in today to listen and take part. As we've said, please do follow up with us afterwards with anything we can help with. But thanks again. Have a good afternoon. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Sam, for hosting. Really enjoyed it.